China has been threatening Australia, punishing us with boycotts on our beef and barley, threatening one on wine. Its second in charge at China's embassy in Canberra today said, well, we'd hurt the Chinese people's feelings by wanting an investigation into how the virus started there. What do you expect then? Because, the virus probably didn't start there, he's hinting, and no wonder Chinese then didn't want our beef and wine anymore.
During that time, Australian ministers claimed that the virus originated from Wuhan, from China, and they did not pinpoint any other places as a possible origin, possible source. So China, we believe, was singled out for the review. We don't think it is fair.
You wonder sometimes whether a guy that's clearly well educated like this bloke dies a little inside, standing up there telling lies for a dictatorship. You just wonder, what does it do to your soul? Well, in fact, it's not our fault. China's picking fights with a lot of countries right now, and they can't all have hurt China's feelings unless it's extremely sensitive, dangerously so. And the fact that, really, the real fact here is that China is, in fact, hurting our feelings with its cyber attacks, really, with its threats, with its refusal to even meet our Prime Minister and our ministers, with the theft of the South China Sea to our north, with stealing our science secrets, like I told you last night. And two papers in the latest Australian Journal of Defence and Strategic Studies now warn war could be coming faster than almost anyone imagines. One of the authors is Ross Babbage. He was head of the strategic analysis in Australia's Office of National Assessments. And he's now with the Washington-based Centre for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments. I spoke to him a short while ago. His message is frightening, but not to be ignored. Ross Babbage, thank you so much indeed for joining me. There's been two papers in the latest Australian Journal of Defence and Strategic Studies. One, not by you, warns of a higher threatened environment over the next 20-odd years, so potentially a war, warning that we've really got to wake up from China. That's the threat. And then there's your paper where you say if there is a conflict, China will be a very, very difficult customer because even if it is losing, it can win.
Well, yes, Chinese doctrine, Chinese planning, and the whole logic of Chinese strategic history and how they fought wars in the past is substantially different to that in the West. And so what we have is a situation where the Western countries, particularly the United States, conceives of a conflict, if there were to be a conflict in the Indo-Pacific against China, they perceive it as being relatively short, very violent, very high technology, highly networked, and it would be essentially done and dusted within a couple of months at most. And they're not structured, really, in a military sense and with logistic systems and so on, to sustain for an extended period. The Chinese, on the other hand, are structured to fight a long war and to certainly to throw a lot of firepower in the first few hours, first maybe 2 or 3, 4 days of a conflict, but then to sustain and not to give in. And their history, going right back to the very early days of the Chinese Communist Party when they were fighting against the Kuomintang, the nationalists in China, and then they fought against the Imperial Japanese Army, and then they fought in Korea, and then, of course, they substantially supported the Vietnamese in the Vietnam War. In each of those occasions, they fought a prolonged, what I call a continuous war through different phases, and they aim to undermine politically their enemies, undermine them at home, sow division, make it look as though the West or their opponents, high-tech opponents, simply could not sustain. And we've got to be very careful we don't set ourselves up for that if we ever have to fight a major war in this theatre.
Now, just to put some context to this, people thinking, war? What war? What? We'd never go to war against China. But the point is, it could happen almost accidentally. It could or happen for a start just by China going too far on Taiwan, an island that it claims as its own. How do you see a war starting?
Look, I think the biggest challenge we have in that respect is that there are serious problems within China, and particularly economic and demographic. The country's aging rapidly. The economy does have serious problems. If the regime in Beijing feels under great threat for its survival or is seriously challenged domestically, which might arise in coming years, then there, I think, will be significant pressure on the leadership to beat the nationalist drum, if you like, play up nationalist themes, and perhaps launch a major adventure internationally. Now, you mentioned Taiwan, and Xi Jinping has actually said publicly on numerous occasions that the reintegration of Taiwan into China is a major goal for the party, and it's one that he hopes himself to secure. And so this is a challenge. If they choose to use force to bring Taiwan into China, I think there will definitely be a fighting. And I think it'll be, that is the most likely single contingency in my case, if there were to be a major war in coming years. And in my view, the risk of that is actually relatively high in the next 5 to 10 years. I think in the longer term, some of the problems facing China will weigh against them. And I think the West will gain its ascendancy, if you like, and the United States will gain its ascendancy in the theatre if we're going out to 2040, 2050 and so on.
That's a bit frightening. I think in 5 years we'll have perhaps just one of the 12 new submarines we've ordered on the Never Never, only one of them. One line in your paper really caught my eye. Now, a couple of years ago, John Howard, the former Prime Minister, pointed out in a speech on national security in London that Australia has more than 1 million people of ethnic Chinese background. They are, most of all, were very loyal citizens, except China is, of course, reaching out to them with money or threats or whatever to try to co-opt them on its side. Now, you, in your paper, mention that we could face sabotage operations conducted by a fifth column. What were you referring to?
What I'm referring to there is the history of the Chinese Communist Party and all of the conflicts that they've been engaged in to use a whole raft of instruments to undermine the opponent in a crisis, and in fact during war too, and that routinely involves all sorts of operations, including enhanced espionage operations, all sorts of things to attack the opposing leadership, including individuals, violent actions to sabotage parts of infrastructure and so on. And certainly, and obviously a lot of enhanced spying operations. Now that's sort of deeply ingrained in the way that they habitually operate. The point I was making here is not so much necessarily that we would be a special case if there were to be a major conflict. I would just expect, though, given their past history and their past habits and their doctrine and the way they train, that they would already have established the wherewithal to conduct these sort of operations in some shape or form in all of the countries that they consider enemy countries. And unfortunately for us, that certainly includes Australia. And I think we need to be prepared for what might be called multidimensional attacks on us. We're not going to be, if there were to be a major war which involved the Western allies, and particularly the United States and ourselves, in let's say in and around Taiwan or further afield, it would actually spread, in my view, geographically. And I think we've got to be prepared for the fact that we will not be immune. That is, there will be efforts to strike some elements of our own interests very directly, and we need to be prepared for a wide range of possibilities there.
Ross Babbage, I mean, I don't think what you're saying is remotely unbelievable. I think it is very real, but I sense that there's a disposition not to believe that the worst could indeed happen. I think we're we're a bit asleep on this one. Thank you so much for trying to wake us up.
It's a pleasure talking, Andrew.